The X-15 aircraft. The X-15 plane and all subsequent models were designed and manufactured by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, known as NASA, in tandem with the US Air Force, based on the conceptual designs of Walter Dornberger, then member of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, known as NACA. The X-15 was part of the series of experimental aircrafts designed by NASA, designated X-planes, used to test, study, and evaluate new technologies as well as aerodynamic principles previously thought unprovable. This program came into being in 1944 as the US Armed Forces wanted to pursue the creation of a new generation of high-speed aircraft. The X-15 in particular, however, had its maiden flight in June 1959, being retired 9 years later in December 1968. The goal was also more aspirational for the NASA scientists. They designed the X-15 with the thought of bridging the gap between flight within the atmosphere and manned flight beyond said atmosphere. It was also understood that the Air Force in particular wanted to test the effects of massive G-force on the pilots. The thought process can then be continued onto believing that NASA was pursuing the creation or invention of far superior, faster air travel for the general populace. As discoveries or breakthroughs from NASA have been known to trickle down through the commercial industry, it would also be silly to not consider the time frame within which the X-15 came into being, during the Cold War. In this time period, every development from NASA was considered a win for the American political system over their Soviet counterparts, a similar scenario to that of the 1960s space race. Therefore, it was definitely a goal for the US government to produce a plane that would break records and put them above their rivals. The X-15 was built by two manufacturers. North American Aviation was responsible for the production of the airframe, and Reaction Motors would produce the engines. The first propulsion system fitted to the X-15 for its initial 24 flights was composed of two Reaction Motors XLR-11 liquid propellant rocket engines. These enhanced engines produced 71 kilonewtons of thrust. This same engine, before enhancement, was used to power the Bell X-1, the first aircraft to break the speed of sound in '47. The engines were then improved upon, and by November 1960, the XLR-99 rocket engine was equipped. The engine setup produced a staggering 250 kilonewtons of thrust. This single-engine setup used a combination of anhydrous ammonia and liquid oxygen as propellant, as well as hydrogen peroxide to operate the turbopump that delivered propellants to the engine, the construction beginning in '55 and '56 respectively. Just like the rest of the rocket-powered hypersonic X-plane series aircrafts, the X-15 was designed to be drop-launched from under the wing of a B-52 mothership. The release from said plane would always take place at a rough altitude of 8.5 miles at a speed of around 500 miles an hour. The X-15 also had a modified tail system to enhance stability at hypersonic speeds. The tail was constructed in a wedge shape for this reason, the drawback being that the aircraft was less stable at lower speeds, as the wedge produced so much drag. In fact, this wedge assembly alone could produce more drag than an entire F-104 starfighter. The internal elements that the pilot interacted with changed with every iteration, improving as expected over the years. The flight system was also incredibly complex, having to operate under rules never before relevant to aircraft design. This included the lack of air when at the height of its altitude capabilities. Due to the sheer height the plane was capable of flying at, there was too little air for the aerodynamic control systems to work effectively. Simply put, there was too little air for common airplane steering mechanisms such as fins, rudders, etc. to be used in order to steer the vehicle. Thus, they had to develop a reaction control system, known as RCS, that steered the plane using rocket thrusters, similar to the principles in jet-propelled boat systems. Also, due to the massive speeds the aircraft was capable of, the entire ejector seat assembly had to be innovated on. They had to produce and fit one that was capable of safely ejecting at speeds of up to Mach 4 or 2,784 miles per hour. The seat was designed in preference to a capsule ejection system. The result was the creation of probably the most sophisticated ejection seat ever constructed, equipped with a set of wings and telescoping booms to stabilize it at Mach 4 ejection speeds. The seat would also lock the pilot in with a series of restraints, which would move the pilot into optimal position, as well as raising deflectors and pulling the pin on an emergency oxygen supply situated under the seat pan. These procedures would therefore protect the pilot from the wind blast, necessary considering a wind blast at Mach speeds are many times the force of wind in a large hurricane. All of this, however, was only in theory, as the seat, thankfully, was never needed to eject, and thus the protection measure were never tested. Possibly due to this sophisticated design, many compare the X-15 to the SR71, saying the SR71 took inspiration from the X-15. This may be true in conceptual form. There could have been an order to construct a plane similar to the X-15 in terms of high altitude capabilities combined with speed. However, this is where the inspiration and similarities seem to end. The X-15 was a small, rocket-powered aircraft capable of glided landings. It was closer to a spacecraft than a conventional aircraft, its purpose being the testing of engineering and piloting issues in the hypersonic flight range, as well as the conduct of scientific data collection in the outer atmosphere. The SR71, however, was a jet plane that took off and landed like all other air-breathing jet planes. Its primary use was for surveillance missions over Soviet Russia. Admittedly, for a jet plane, it was incredibly fast with max speeds of 2,200 miles per hour, or Mach 3.3. It was also capable of high-altitude operation of up to 80 plus kilometers. These exceptional operational achievements may have also inspired comparison, but in reality, the X-15 in theory could fly twice as fast and go many times higher than the SR-71. This combined with the fact that one is a designated research vessel and the other a military reconnaissance plane, both of which sharing no common design influences, speak to a lack of commonality. On the other hand, the X-15 has said to inspire or lay the groundwork for some other designs, due to the technological data they had gathered from it during its operational time being put to use in many of NASA's future projects, in particular the X-43 aircraft. This unmanned hypersonic aircraft is said to be the direct descendant of the X-15. As a fellow member of NASA's X-Plane series, the technological innovations made from the development of the X-15 can be seen to directly translate into the development of the new much faster X-43. The unmanned aircraft can reach speeds of up to Mach 9.6. Whilst the X-15 undoubtedly inspired the X-43 and demonstrated to NASA's technicians the do's and don'ts of such hypersonic travel, the two shared limited design elements. The two were designed for launch from a mothership and had the purpose of testing scientific principles at hypersonic speeds, but the means to which the planes were built to achieve this were different. The X-15 used rocket-propelled engines, whilst the engine in the X-43 was a supersonic combustion ramjet, or scramjet. The X-15 was also designed to be landed, whilst the X-43 always finished its flight mission floating in the sea. And of course, the X-15 was also manned. The X-15 is king among aircrafts in terms of altitudes achieved, with only designated spacecrafts traveling higher. This achievement thus allowed for pilot Joe Walker to join the ranks of US and Soviet astronauts as the first humans to ever exceed 100 kilometers in altitude. He was the only pilot in the program to do this, the only pilot to reach the edge of space in an orbital aircraft. The X-15 also set a speed record of Mach 6.7. To achieve these staggering numbers, a huge number of flights were conducted considering the magnitude of the undertaking. Between the 3 built aircrafts and 13 official pilots, 199 flight missions were recorded between 59 and 68. The pilots were already well experienced in high-intensity flight, even stating that, in the face of never-before-done feats, they were not afraid. All of their brainpower was devoted to the success of each individual mission, astounding considering that one of their fellow pilots had died on re-entry during this time period. But nothing could prepare them for the sights they anticipated once they got 100 kilometers high on the edge of space itself. Each pilot knew that at such a height they could maintain there for a period of 3 to 4 minutes. One pilot, Joe Engel, said that I naively thought there would be a lot of time. I thought I would be enjoying the view out of the window. The wanderlust the pilot expected was quickly stripped away, however. When he reached this height, his mission was not to look out the window at the pretty blue-green marble below him. He was there to run a series of tests within a short amount of time. Inside 3 to 4 minutes, he had to conduct several maneuvers, including rolling and pitching the plane 90 degrees in the opposite direction in order for the onboard ultraviolet and infrared sensors to collect atmospheric data. About this, Engel went on to state, I honestly can say that I was so terribly focused on flying these profiles, the 90-degree pitch, etc., as closely as possible that I didn't really have time to look out the window and see how pretty it was. This was generally how most missions at this level of the atmosphere would go. On return, each pilot, after breaking through the upper atmosphere, would begin a 20-degree angle of attack, which would then decrease to 26 degrees in the lower atmosphere to lessen the heat damage to the X-15 whilst slowing. Another pilot of the X-15 was an unknown former Navy pilot by the name of Neil Armstrong. He was one of the 13 pilots of the X-15, and by all accounts, he had about as much fun as he did on the moon. One of his flight missions records Armstrong descending back into the atmosphere, descending back down to Earth. On his descent, there was a worry the pilot would experience higher than 5 Gs, so he decided to raise the nose of the X-15, which caused the plane to balloon upwards, causing the future moonwalker to miss his planned landing point in Lake Edwards Air Force Base. Reports say that on this realization, Armstrong began swearing profusely as his aircraft continued towards Los Angeles, at a rate of 10 American football fields a second. At this point, being ordered by flight control to turn a hard left, Armstrong had no control over the plane's navigation, as the atmosphere was too thin for the plane's flight control surfaces to maneuver with. Eventually, sub 100,000 feet in elevation, he gained back control of the plummeting aircraft and managed to set it down safely in a Rosamond dry lake. A joke then began circulating around the flight that Armstrong had in fact nearly set her down in nearby Joshua Tree. Today, you can find the two X-15s in two museums. The X-15A1 is suspended in the National Air Force and Flight Museum, Washington, and the X-15A2 is housed in the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. Several mock-ups or imitations can also be seen throughout the US.